I would say only in Dutch, but it's the English session. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeroen Jansen. I'm a product marketing manager for Microsoft 365 and customer success here in the Netherlands. And I would like to welcome you to this Teams as a Platform session number 2 in our webinar series. And this session is all about governance within Teams, how to make sure that you get everything into place, that you know how to be compliant, how to know how your governance work. And all of this will be handled today by, next to me,
Jos Verlinden, or Josh, right? Whatever works for you, right? I'll listen to most things. My name, I work in Microsoft within the partner organization as a technical architect, and I work quite often with partners such as
Erik Bouwman, business consultant at Macaw, business consultant at Microsoft 365. Well, with a preference for governance, I would say.
Okay.
So thank you all for joining for today. If you have any questions, you can see right here what you can do. You can ask questions to our subject matter experts. Today will it be Michel and Bas. They're both from Macaw, and they will be able to answer all of your questions. So please make sure they get a lot of questions, that they get overwhelmed with questions. So we have a great content for you to share. And if you have any questions, please make sure that you ask the questions, and we will try to answer them as quickly as possible. So let's take a look at where we are now today. Let's take a look what Teams means for us. And as you can see, the workplace is changing. As you might already have seen already, is that we're in the middle of a pandemic. And in this pandemic, we started working from home a lot. Some people already work from home, but it became mandatory. And in the last year, during the summer, we were able to get a bit back to office, but again, we shut down a bit. So we're now working in what we call a hybrid mode. And that means that our workplace is changing. And what is changing? We need to do more from home. We need to communicate in a different manner. We have all of these devices that we need to manage, right? So we got a cell phone, you got your smartphone, you got tablets, laptops, whatsoever. And all these devices you are using every day. So you pick and choose what works best for you. As you all can see, there's already like 5 generations in the workforce today. So if you look at the people who are already beginning to get to their pension age, or see the people just started working, there's a gap in that generation, what you can do. So if a person who's almost at the pension, it works in another way than people who just come out of school and now using all of these tools, the multitasking as they can do. I have a 17-year-old daughter. She does her homework with music on her ears. When doing her homework, she's watching YouTube movies or whatever, but they can multitask like crazy. That's not something I can do, so maybe I'm there near to my pension, who knows? So again, that is changing the workforce. So we need to prepare ourselves for this new modern workplace. And how does this new modern workplace has its own challenges, right? So like today, and I don't know how it is for you guys, but 28% of your time you're spending on email. So that's a lot. That's almost a third of your time you're doing all of these email things. And I try to clean up my email, but it's really difficult, especially when I'm now presenting here. Email is floating in. There's nobody says, oh, stop, no email. He's presenting, but it's coming, right? And you have to take care of that. So making sure that I can use Teams for chatting and emails for other stuff, for more the personal stuff I need to answer, that makes my work day easier. So we're gonna, in this webinar series, you're gonna also take a look at that, how it can be even more productive with other kinds of tools. Also, finding information is sometimes difficult. We see that almost 60% of managers find it difficult to find the information they need. So also with Teams, how do you find the right information? Where do you store your information? How do you work with tagging? How do you use all other kinds of stuff with rights and policies? So we're going to do a bit of a deep dive into that today in our governance session on tagging and on making sure that you got all these ways of viewing data and finding your data. So imagine a workplace where you can have all these integrated business applications. So the applications you're using right now, let's say you're working with Workday or with ServiceNow, have that integrated within Microsoft Teams. That would be really handy. Or automate routine tasks. Let's say I get some work declarations from my colleagues and I need to approve them. Then I get a message automatically when they enter into the system. I get a notification, and within Teams I can handle the approvals. And also, if they want to have a holiday and ask for days of leave, then it's really easy for me to get that notification, and within Teams I can approve it or can adjust it or chat with them and without getting out of that environment. So that's really handy. And bringing all of these apps, right? I was talking about ServiceNow and Workday. We're going to see an Power App later on from Macaw. It's going to show you what you can do around governance. These are these applications that you can have, but you need to take care of the fact, how am I compliant? How is my governance handled with these applications? So we're going to do a deep dive on that. And of course, about communication. It's really important that you can communicate in the right manner. So basically, we can do it all within Teams, right? And not only we can use Teams, but also we have all of these surface devices. You can manage these devices in one single environment. So manage your Teams, manage your surface devices whatsoever. And also have governance in place for that. Do we have the right policies? Is encrypted? Are these devices encrypted? So all from the same environment, you can do that. In this webinar series, we're going to talk about the 4 pillars, what we call Teams as a platform. We start with the Power Apps. Small applications or big applications that reside into Teams or on a website or whatsoever, that you can easily build or is built by a partner or a software vendor that can help you do your day-to-day tasks. Secondly is Power Automate, and Power Automate shows the automation of processes. We have a session on that. I think it's on the 30th of March. It's the Power Automate session. So if you wanted to do a deep dive on that, I invite you to join us then and look at the registration link where you can find the Power Automate session. Then Power Virtual Agents or chatbots. Tomorrow in our session, we're going to show a bit about chatbots. So if you want to know more about chatbots and Power Virtual Agents, please take a notice at the session that we have tomorrow, where we will show some cool features that we have with Workplace Buddy on that. And last but not least, third-party applications. So applications that are within Microsoft Teams that are, let's say, teamified, so that you can use these applications with Microsoft Teams. And we're now seeing even complete desktop applications reside into Teams. So how cool is that? And all that, have that within Microsoft Teams. But again, productivity isn't just a tool, it's about the approach. How do you work? What is the best way to work? 20% is only technology, 80% is on policies, how you work, the way you want to work. It's all in a human factor. And with that, I'd like to take it over to Erik Bouwman, who's going to give you more insights on how to work with governance and how governance will work for you for now and in the future.
Thank you. Yeah, let's talk about governance. There's a lot to talk about, so hopefully we can cover most of it within the hour, but there is a lot more to tell and there's a lot more deep dive to go. But for now, let's dive into governance. And strangely enough, I looked up what governance is about at first. So this is, I'm not going to read it out loud, but this is basically what it is. And what you might see is that it's not only about how to keep it easy to maintain or how to make sure we as IT can manage it easily. It is more about how can I make sure that the business can do their work and how can I make sure that they can fulfill their strategy. So they're kind of aligned, IT and business here, and governance is really to make sure that business can do their work. So because I think it is that important, I would like you to keep this slide in mind as the kind of almost the most important slide of this whole presentation. That adoption and governance go hand in hand, and they actually need each other. I would say without governance, you can adopt whatever you want, but in a few years, the adoption effort that you did will eventually be of no use because of a lack of governance. And the other way around, it's exactly the same. If you do very good governance, but you didn't announce it to people, the reason why you did things and on which platform you did it, there'll be no adoption at all. So you have a very good governed platform without any users. So yeah, actually they go hand in hand.
Yeah, it sounds kind of familiar, right? Reminds me of the SharePoint times when all people started using SharePoint. You had loads and loads of sites, so we would be all more productive, right? But in reality, what happened is that I couldn't find the site that I was looking for.
Yeah.
Right? Or they were all structured differently, or I didn't know where to share my information, right? And as a result, people wouldn't know where to find it, right? So do you see something similar?
Exactly. My point with Teams is it's exactly the same. I mean, I've been working with SharePoint since SharePoint 2003, and in each of these projects, you see in the beginning, without any proper governance, you'll see that in the beginning they can work because you have a few sites and you know which sites there are, where to find what. But as they grow, it gets more difficult, and the same you see with teams. As they grow, it gets more difficult. So that is actually why governance is so important, and that is actually why communicating about governance, so the actual adoption, is important as well. As an example, what we often use is the when to use what. One of the questions that we are asked most when implementing Microsoft 365 is, okay, we have Teams, we have SharePoint, we have Yammer, we have Outlook, we have OneDrive. When do we use what?
Which shall we use?
Indeed. So we try to simplify this by showing this matrix that really is, it's not that you have to use it this way, but this is our way of presenting a customer how they can use it. And if every user uses it this way, it makes it easier, one, to understand when to use what, but also, since everybody is going to use it the same way, it boosts your governance because it is a structured way of working. So it works both ways in lots of ways.
And for me as an end user, it's also more simpler to predict, okay, what is the communication, right? Where should I look, or where should I send information?
Yeah. So explaining this, it benefits both governance and adoption, and that goes for more adoption tooling, governance tooling that we have. So this session, of course, is about governance in Teams as a platform, but as you can see, well, you get more. It's not only about Teams. So doing proper governance also means doing proper governance on the platform. So not only proper governance on Teams. It used to look a bit like this. So you have this Microsoft 365 with lots of services around it that you have to govern. What we see nowadays is that Microsoft is heading this way. Where, well, Teams is your single pane of glass for doing your daily work. And indeed, it uses all the services that are available within the platform to do exactly that. So you see Viva now as an icon there, but you also see Teams, you see SharePoint, and everything will be available within your Teams environment as an app.
And Teams depends on a lot of the other services. So that makes a lot of sense that just covering Teams probably won't solve your problem.
No.
You need to be aware.
Absolutely. So, and that is where you see, and this is a very simplified image, but that is where you see
simple is clear.
Simple is clear indeed. That you first have to have the basics in place. So make sure that the governance of your platform as a whole is covered, and then based on that, you can build on the governance of the individual services that are on top of the platform.
Yeah. So for each individual service.
Right? Yeah. For each individual service. So since we're focusing on Teams in this session, let's show it a bit different, because this is actually what we see happening for each and every service. But for Teams specifically on the left side, you'll see that, of course, we need to govern Microsoft as a whole. That's the platform. Within that, we have Teams as a service, but we have some rules around it, how to work with that. And then, of course, there's data stored in Teams, which is actually, of course, also stored in SharePoint. So we need to govern the data in Teams. And then nowadays, there are tons of apps in Teams, so we need to govern those as well. Similar on the right side, if we take Power Platform as a service, for example, you see the same. You have Microsoft 365, you have the service itself, you have the data within the environments, and you have the apps in the environment. So it's the same. If you plot SharePoint on this, you see the exact same picture. Apps you can replace by web parts, for example, and yeah, you get exactly the same.
So now with Dataverse for Teams, right? What does that do to this picture?
Well, it kind of turns this a bit around, a bit like this.
Okay.
Because what you have now is Dataverse for Teams is actually your Power App within Teams. It is, of course, a Power App, but it's part of your team. So
it also has an environment.
And it also has an environment, but if you remove the team, gone is your app. So, but if it was a successful app that you want to reuse, well, it's gone. So you have to think about how to govern those together.
Okay, so they're clearly interlinked, and you need to be aware of that, and it needs to be part of your policy, part of your governance plan.
Yep.
Right? So how do you figure this out, right? So you work with customers.
Yep.
And you present them with these scenarios, right? So what's the journey then?
Yeah. Well, then we go into the first step of the layers that we saw, the governance of Microsoft 365. And during the presentation, we go down from the overall governance towards the governance in apps. So start with this one. This is the most complex picture that you're going to get in this session. But I do feel that it is important because this shows what you need to cover to have the basics in place. So on one side you see the platform where you have user management and licenses, for example, where, for example, the external users, if you invite guests to a team, how do you govern that? What do you do with those guest users? Do you keep them in Azure Active Directory? Do you clean them up once in a while? How do you cover that? External threats, that's more about email or how you do malware, all those kind of things. But also data governance. I mean, there's a lot of data on your platform. All of those needs to be governed with retention rules. How long does data need to stay there, or when should it be removed? Those kind of questions.
Yeah, so these are all the things that are similar or related between different parts of the platform, right? So that it wouldn't make sense to have a very stringent policy on removing data on just Teams while you leave it for ages in your email system.
Doesn't make sense.
Or vice versa, right? So these are the common parts.
Yeah, yeah. And maybe one of the most important one is the fourth one that you see down there. That's the platform changes, because what you see happening is that Microsoft, doesn't stop with delivering you the platform and then just start working with it. It continues with improving the platform, coming with new functionality, changing functionality, sometimes deleting stuff that you had in place, but it's replaced by some new or integrated in Teams or whatever. You have to keep track of those changes, and you have to have some kind of governance policy in place, how to communicate those changes towards the end users, because they're going to work with it.
So yeah, because especially Teams is built as a ever-changing platform.
Yep.
We send out advanced notifications to the admins, but unless that information also lands with the end users.
Yeah. So, and there again, you see that adoption and communication is a big part of your governance strategy. Yeah. Last one that I can point out is the backup strategy. You're all aware that Microsoft takes care of deleted documents, but you can get them back up to 93 days. And after that, you have to do something, or at least make a decision that you stick with the Microsoft available backup policies. Yeah.
Okay.
So if you have that arranged, then you can go up one level, and for each individual services, so for Teams, for a Power Platform, for SharePoint, just name them. You're going to decide about the governance for the individual services, the ownership of each of those services, because that's very important as well. Who within the company owns the service and make sure that the communication takes place about all the changes, but also, for example, for Teams, is an owner of the team responsible for the data within the team? Is an owner responsible for the people who are invited into the team? Those kind of questions are important there. The adoption, how do we make sure that it's actually going to be used instead of email? And there are 2 points that we see there. The migration and design are important for some services. So migration for SharePoint and Teams and all data related things, OneDrive. Design for Power Apps, do you want a corporate team or don't you?
So these are kind of the optionals, right? Where if it makes sense to a customer, yes. Yeah. Let's touch on that.
And that is where we say you get a managed service if you have that in place.
So these are right. So this is clearly the more complex picture compared to the very simple version that you introduced in. So how do you work with this to customers, right? Do you just say this? Okay, now you need to answer each of these boxes and then you're done?
Yeah, that's basically what we do. No, kidding. No, what we we mostly start with a governance plan, and that governance plan is something that we can write for them, but always together with the customer. So they know the customer, they know themselves better than we do. We know the best practices around how to govern Microsoft 365. So together we start doing some sessions about what is best for the customer and how do we fill out the governance template that we have.
Okay.
The sessions can be short, as in we give the best practices and write a recommendation and then they go ahead with it. Or it can be more advanced where we write the governance plan and together with the customer, of course, and then it can take up to a couple of days, but then, yeah.
Yeah, and that's then a separate one for the platform and for each individual service, right? Or, well, they could be folded into the same document.
Yeah, what we mostly see is one for the platform, and then for the collaboration-related services, because OneDrive and SharePoint and Teams are more or less related.
Yep.
We write one governance plan for those services and a separate one for Power Platform. But nowadays, they have to look at each other, because now we have Dataverse for Teams as well. So we have to make sure that they are aligned, of course.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
Yeah. Shouldn't forget about this. Writing one is one thing. Communicating about the governance plan and why you make the decisions and communicating that to the end users that's another thing, and that's the most important thing in my opinion. It shouldn't be just an IT party. It should be something that is explained to the user why.
And perhaps they also have a say in what makes sense to run the business, for instance.
Of course, yeah.
Or what's a business requirement rather than an IT requirement.
Yeah, it should be about helping them reaching their goals, and security is one of them. And sometimes it makes working a bit difficult, but then at least if you explain that there's a reason for this.
Yeah, and sometimes perhaps you need to balance the security requirements with the business requirements, where the business might say, okay, everything open, and security might say everything closed. What's the correct one?
Sensitivity levels is a good example of those. There have the business, what's sensitive, and you have IT, how to implement it and do those kind of things. Yeah, so that's the governance plan. Part of the governance plan is, in our case, also, in Dutch we say RACI, in English we say RACI. I'm not sure which one is correct, but that.
RACI.
Yeah, RACI, where we state per service, but also overall, who is responsible, who's accountable, who's consulted, and who's going to be informed on each of the services. This is especially handy because you can easily find out who's responsible for what and where you have to turn to if you need to do something.
So essentially a very detailed version where if you really get down to details that everyone actually can verify, okay, who is the responsible person for this? Am I perhaps responsible?
Yeah, so one of the examples, this is the one for teams. You see request team, create team, delete team, request teams, restore, those kind of things. You see that indeed the end user is responsible for some part of the thing, but if you want to have a team restored, somebody else is responsible, in this case IT. So if you have this in place, you can easily point out who's responsible for what, and therefore also accountable in some cases.
Yeah, and this is not governed or not, you're not dictated by you, right? This is for each customer. This can be different, right? But it needs to make sense for them, I guess.
Yeah, and it depends on some decision that we make. I mean, if you want to every user to create their own teams, requesting a team is a kind of silly. If we decide that there's a provisioning process in place, then requesting a team makes sense, and therefore we need to appoint who can request teams and those kind of things.
And this is where you can work with your customers to help them decide, based on your experience with other customers, perhaps what makes sense for them. And
indeed, it is a living document together with the governance plan, of course, because new functionality is introduced, and therefore we need to change the governance plan. So it continues to change, so to speak. Yeah. And then we go down into the second level, really, the governance of teams itself. And that is where we see, well, we came up with a maturity level. It's not that difficult, but it is when the pandemic started, we saw, that's really the first phase of the maturity level. We saw lots of customers kind of panicking. Okay, we need to have something in place to start
working. There was
working.
a surge, let's call it that, right? Because I think actually I recognize this pattern even before the pandemic, right?
Yep.
Our customers don't jump in with everything at one go.
Yep.
You do one part first, then you move on, you expand, right? Make it a gradual process, right? So
that's actually what it is, but it speeded it up. Let's
definitely.
Let's do it that way. And then, in the first phase, you just use Teams for your communication bit. You start your meetings, you invite people to the meetings, you end your meetings, and that's it. So that's quite easy. Yeah. It starts to become interesting, especially in terms of governance, when you go to the second phase, which is about collaboration and share, because that's actually where you're going to create the teams, where you're going to invite people to your teams as a guest, becoming part of the Active Directory as a guest, start sharing content with them, co-authoring,
file storing, co-authoring,
those kind of things, and being able, to make use of the more Microsoft default apps as
or
in Planner.
Perhaps combine the SharePoint use that already was there with the teams, right? Aligning them.
Yeah, those kind of things. So that's where it becomes interesting. And the third one is the last one, really, and that's where Teams as a platform is heading, of course, where you not only use Teams as your collaboration store and communication part, but you also introduce not only the Microsoft apps to make your work even more productive, but also use all kinds of external apps or your own apps that you create using
Same as you do on your phone, right?
Yeah.
There must be an app for that.
Absolutely, there must be an app for that. So, and for each of these phases, there's a different approach, there's a gradual growth, I would say, where you grow into when doing your governance. Yeah.
So does everyone do that in the same way?
Sorry, does everyone do it in the same way? Well, it is actually a nice bridge.
Clearly not.
Yeah. this was your question, sorry?
No. Move on.
Yeah. This is basically the second phase of your maturity that we see, because this is where the question is asked, similar to what we had in SharePoint in the past. How do we make sure that the teams that are in place are still relevant and contains the data that I want them to contain?
That it just doesn't keep scrolling and adding more and more, and that.
Yeah,
that seems like a sensible thing.
Lessons learned from the past, so to speak.
Yeah. And I can imagine, right, with the example that you mentioned before about a year ago, that people just say, okay, let's just enable it, right? And that's the thing. Let's do the quickest thing. Right?
Indeed. So at some point, at least you need to think about that and start implementing governance measures. This is kind of our advice, where the first one is not really an advice, but more of an better don't do that. Just enable the service and see.
We understand that in some point in time you might have needed to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But soon after that, you need to have some controls in place, and we have basically three. Guard creation at the gate is more like have some kind of provision or request engine where on request we can create teams. Or SharePoint for that matter, or Power Platform for that matter. That could be exactly the same in those cases. But monitor after creation, that's more the reporting side of things. So if a lot of teams have been created, what do you do with them? Give some insights in how many users are on those teams, how many teams do we have in general, how many teams have guest access, how many teams have owners more than 5 or less than 2, those kind of information.
Yeah, but there must also then it must be clear that there's someone looking at those reports and acting on it, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So that's more the organizational part of things. Yeah. So it's not only about the governance part, it's also about
it's not just having a stack of paper, right?
No, that's nice to have a look at each month, but if you don't act on it, it doesn't work. And the third one is implementing group expiry. That's standard Microsoft functionality that automatically can remove teams or groups based on the fact that they're not used anymore for a number of defined days. Yeah. So to get more into detail of those, let's head to the first one. This is an example of how provisioning can work. This is the provisioning app that we've created. As you can see, it lives inside Teams. We have also a bot for that, so the virtual agent who can do exactly the same. But
so as a new user, I can pick the interface that makes most sense to me.
It could be. On the other hand, the app gives some advantages about pick lists and so on. Those things are not possible on the virtual agent, but it is fun to be able to just request it by typing something, right? Isn't it? So that one is in place as well. It works fairly simple. It's based on standard functionality that is available in the Power Platform. You can just select what you want if you need it, but we also want to make sure that the user can be helped if they don't really know what they need. So based on a set of questions, which we can define ourselves, or can you define yourselves, based on the weight factor that can be added to it, that they make a decision for you. A recommendation, and based on that recommendation, the next step is, of course, that it asks some basic information, the title, the description, and so on. And as you can see, that is where adoption and governance go hand in hand again, because we try to help the user to pick the right platform. And if they know it already, that's fine. And here you see an example of the governance part. Never one owner, always at least 2, and the provisioning makes sure that it's done.
Yeah.
Select your template. Based on the template, you can select a sensitivity label. If you don't have them implemented, you can just enable guest access or public or not. So the security part is taken care of as well, and it forces you to take care of that. Well, and the last step after approval, it is provisioned or not. And if you want to have it approved or not, depends on the template that you select. So that is also up to you to configure. So this is an example. It can be a manual process as well, of course, but for the larger organizations, I guess it is very helpful.
It makes most sense, right? And how did you build this, right? You mentioned the Power Platform.
It's a Power App combined with Power Automate. And logic, some logic in the Azure function to make sure that it's easy to maintain.
Okay.
But, that's basically it.
So you can implement this with any customer.
There are some SharePoint lists on the backside, of course, to make sure
there's some data storage, right? Okay, but right, it's not something that someone needs to build, right? They can, well,
I think it's cheaper not to build it yourself in those cases.
Just call you.
Of course, just call me.
No, it makes sense, right? And it's cool to see that. Yesterday we talked about using Power Apps for business function, right? Clearly, this is a business function, right?
Absolutely.
And if you guys can help implement this for a customer, that saves a bundle and brings better control, right? And still leaves the power with the end user.
Yeah, absolutely. So so that's one example.
And then I think one of the other steps was where you mentioned reporting, right? So if I don't have this in place yet, or perhaps I do have it in place, right? So how does the Center of Excellence or governance body know what's happening?
Yeah, so there are several ways to do that, but what we did in this example is create a Power BI report based on the PowerShell script that we wrote, and it really gets all the data from the Microsoft 365 environment in this case on site level, because every team has a site. So and it's equally important to have insight in the SharePoint site as well as having insight in the teams. So this way we get them both in one report, and this provides information in not only a number of sites but also on which type of site, as you can see, and also when the sites have been created. But as you see that the tabs are very small on the example, but it also provides information which sites have the name test, or how many private channels are there. How many teams have more than 5 owners, which could be a risk. How many teams have less than 1 owner, which is sure a risk, for sure a risk.
Well, less than 1 would be very problematic.
And it exists, So that information is available then in the report. It's provided monthly, and based on that, they can act on it.
Okay, so there's already base reports like this in the Teams Admin Center, specifically for Teams, or the Microsoft 365 Admin Center for the various. But this is tied to the governance model that you built, right, and to the tooling that you're using, so that you can zoom into much more detail and get much closer to what is the business purpose of this site? What is the business purpose of this team? Is it still being used? That sort of thing.
Yeah, indeed.
Okay,
those kind of things. Yeah.
And this lives within Teams as well.
This lives within Teams as well, of course. Of course. Yeah. All right. Group Expiry is the last one on the list. What we see there is, it is available by default if you have Azure Active Directory P1. So there is some licensing involved here, but it is quite effective because it makes sure that if you have this setting enabled, for example, for 90 days, the owner gets a message after 90 days of not using, and that actually means not using, so nobody touches the team, no chat, no editing documents, no uploading documents, those kind of things. The owner gets a message, this team hasn't been used for 90 days, do you want to delete it, or for 180 or for 270 days? If he says no, we have another 90 days. If he says yes, then we clean up the team, and then it's automatically.
And just to clarify, right, this reads group expiry, right? And you're talking about groups, right? How does it relate to a team?
Yeah, so every team has a group attached to it. That's where the members and the owners of the team are actually stored. And there are a lot of group connected things within Microsoft. It's not only the team, it's also a planner, for example. It's a SharePoint team site, all those kind of things. Power BI, they're all linked to groups. So that's the basics of it all.
That's the Office 365 universal group, right? So you need to monitor those, right? And And
so there are some minor downsides, but those are some sites, for example, projects that you want to keep in place for a long time, even though the project has ended. You want to keep the team intact. You still get the message, of course, as an owner. So those sites, what you can do, what we mostly do, because there's no opt-out possibility for this, there's only an opt-in possibility. What you can do is create a separate list where we use a PowerShell script to make sure that they stay in place.
To generate some activity. Okay.
Yeah. So that's the work.
Keep alive. Keep
alive. Yeah, those kind of things. Yeah. Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
Yep.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Good. Important to mention this one, I believe. Sensitivity labels I'll get to in the next slides, but it used to be that sensitivity labels were only meant for documents. Individual documents to say, okay, this is a very classified document, or this is a internal document, or this is a public document. But you can also use sensitivity labels nowadays for defining the confidentiality of a team.
Of a container, if you will, right? So that everything in that container by default
Yeah, it really doesn't mean that all your documents will have this sensitivity label, but it actually means that you can influence the guest access allowed or not, or you can influence the privacy or public of the team as a whole.
Yeah.
So not to come. So that might be useful. You saw it in the example of the provisioning that I gave you. Yeah.
Thanks.
Okay.
So how do you then implement this? Because now we've laid down the rules. We've seen a couple of examples of, okay, this is where you really should have your policy clear.
Yep.
But then, okay, so then I've got my policy clear. How do I make sure that people are aware of that, implement it, right? Is that something that you can help customers in as well?
Of course, yeah. And I guess you mean about the data policies that you have in the teams. Yeah. Before I go into that, I think it's wise to say that it all starts with behavior. So if people don't understand why they should do something, if people don't understand why you shouldn't just email sensitive content and why you should be careful with doing those things, you can implement IT or whatever you want, but then it's not going to work. So it all starts with making sure that people understand. Again, communication is key here. Make sure that people understand that some things are just sensitive and shouldn't be sent to just anyone, but should be careful with that. So it starts there. If that behavior is in place and if people understand where we're heading and why we do things, then you can start defining processes on, okay, sensitive data, we control it this way. And then we have the technology to support that or to back that up by implementing, and in this case, it's all about retention labels, sensitivity labels, and DLP as in data loss policies.
Yeah, and then if I, as an end user, can see that because the technology presents that information to me, then I can change my behavior, right, to align to the process that's being
but if we just implement and show that to the user, then it's like, but I want to send this document. Come on.
Yeah, get out of the way.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
It's kind of like having a lock on a door, right? So it makes it more difficult to walk through the wall.
Yeah.
But because I need to turn the lock first.
That's it. So explanation first, change behavior, let people understand, and then implement it. Yeah. That makes sense. So then, as I said, what do we have for retention, sensitivity, and DLP? Just to get some insights on those, retention is really meant for defining which documents need to stay and for how long, or which documents need to be deleted and when. That's really about retention.
So it's both for keeping as well as for removing.
Yeah.
Okay.
For force removing. When you have E5, you have extra functionalities as disposition review, so that you can each year can review a document if it still needs to be there. Those kind of functionalities, but that's more the E5 side of things. You get some extras there.
Advanced scenarios.
Advanced scenarios, indeed. But yeah, generally it is about that. You can link only one label to that, and then
So apart from a few of those things, right? Most customers will already have this, right? Because a lot of customers already have E3 in place, so they can get a good start with that. But depending on what their policy is, they might need more, or is that for everyone or for some?
Well, my feeling is that not that many customers use this, although they have it in their E3 license.
Okay, so it's really unused tools, right? That are in the toolbox that just can be enabled.
But they are difficult to implement because you need to implement them together with the business, and that's where it in some cases fails.
So if I have a large organization, right? Do I do this for everyone at once? Where do I start?
Yeah, you need to define, first of all, what type of content do I have, and are there any legislation around it? So how long do I need to keep documents? And therefore, then you can indeed enforce that people need to link retention labels to specific documents, and then it's in place. But indeed, you first need to think about, what do I have? Where do I work with? And what are my procedures to apply retention labels? So that's really where the problem lies. It is a project in itself, implementing retention labels and implementing the sensitivity labels. Yeah.
And would it make sense to start with specific departments or?
Not so much for the retention labels. It does make sense for the sensitivity labels, because what you see there is where it's more about how sensitive is content. And that is where you see that legal, that HR, that those departments are mostly aware of
research and development might want to protect their secrets a bit better.
Yeah, those kind of things. And that is where you see that it makes sense to start with those people, because they're eager to work with that, because they don't want their sensitive content to flow out of the company.
And once you've implemented it there, essentially, right, you can take the pattern that then emerges for that specific customer and say, okay, where else does can we reuse this? Right?
And it doesn't immediately have to start encrypting stuff, or you can start with making them aware by just having the labels there. Okay. DLP policies, I don't have a slide of that, but that is more about making sure that either email or chat or documents in relation to credit card numbers or bank account numbers or GDPR related content doesn't just go out without any notification that, oh, you might not want to send this.
So that at least as an end user, I can make the decision, right? That well, the system notifies me of that, and then it detects it based on the different patterns that are there.
Yeah, and then I can find it back if I decide to send it anyway. Then at least it's there.
Well, let me be responsible rather than the computer.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. That's basically it. All right. So then we get to the fourth layer, and that is about the actual apps in Teams. That is where Teams as a platform is. That's why.
Right, because we've been talking about, let's say, the team side of the world, well, a bit of the platform side as well, right, in the storage. So how do you translate this into applications, right? I see that you list a couple of different types of applications.
Yeah, three types really. As I said before, we call it a single pane of glass because we see that Teams is gonna be, well, your single dashboard where you work from during your day, and that's where we see three types of apps in general. So the Microsoft apps, which is really, well, your apps, which comes with Microsoft 365. We see your custom apps, and those are the apps that you build yourselves with the Power Platform, with Power Automate, with virtual agents, Power BI dashboard, those kind of things, but also things you build with scripting or with Visual Studio or everything related to
in-house applications or things that are deployed in-house, right?
Yeah.
They might actually come from someone else, right? Such as, I think, your provisioning app.
Absolutely.
That would be something that you deliver to the customer, but it would show up as a custom application.
Yeah. Unless we make sure that our app is in the store, and then it's going to be a third-party app.
Okay.
And then that's the third category that you're seeing there. Every app that you can get from the App Store that you can find there. That's the third-party apps. That's is actually the third category. Yeah.
And for an end user, these are just shown as a collection, right? Of course, they can zoom into the different parts.
Yeah, indeed. So each of those types, I listed them because they have different types of behavior and therefore different types of governance. So for the Microsoft apps, I would say this is the easiest one. It is safe to allow all, but it could be that you don't want to present them all. For example, there's a lot more in there than just regular suspects like Microsoft List or Yammer or those kind of things. Also, the actual Power App platform is listed there, and also, for example, Power Automate or DevOps related to Azure. Those kind of things are all in there as well. If you don't work with DevOps, it might make sense to just block them or exclude them from the list to make sure that the user don't see them. And well, they are not bothered with those.
Well, yeah. So this helps. I think this is the category where the trust probably is there because well, this customer already uses Office 365, so trust is probably not the issue here.
True.
It's more the strategic direction. Which of these applications, right? Do we want to have Delve, right, or do we want to have another platform to disseminate information?
Absolutely. So I guess the easiest in most cases we just say block some or.
And you can make similar decisions for the other categories.
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that kind of work exactly the same. The Power Platform part is a bit different, of course. Okay. And that is where we see, of course, everybody knows the citizen developer terms. Even I guess almost everybody have heard of it. To make sure that we want to empower our employees to automate stuff to make sure that they get more productive.
Yeah, so the low code, but full developers, right, or the makers, right, whatever term.
Well, the Power Platform supports both sides. So the freedom side, as in the citizen developer and make your apps and become productive. But then on the other hand, we also have, of course, the admins and users who, well, they're more focused on quality and make sure that we reuse apps more often and that we create the bigger apps for the whole company, those kind of things. And that is a difficult balance.
Well, and it also probably has to do with the time and effort that you can spend to create something, right? If I need something next week, then it might be, there's less time for testing, right? So probably the quality might suffer. But
But still, you need to find the balance, and where do we go with the freedom and where do we go with the quality? So we need to, to be either.
Where is the slider? Yeah.
It's a slider, and somewhere, mostly we end up somewhere in the middle, but it depends on the company, what they want to allow and what they don't want to allow, how mature are the employees, those kind of questions.
And what makes sense for a specific group, right, or a specific department or workforce.
Absolutely, absolutely. So what we do is separate it in ungoverned and governed apps. So the ungoverned apps is your freedom bit, where you can just create Dataverse. I'll go next to the Dataverse is part of that as well, that you have your freedom bit, you create in your own team, you create your own app, you create your own database and make sure that the stuff you want the app to do actually works. And the same goes for the regular apps. You create your app to make sure that some process is automated or
And that also makes sense then, the slide in the beginning where you said, okay, the governance that you make for teams needs to align or needs to cross over in what you do for the Power Platform. Because this Dataverse for Teams is what connects it, right? And if you give freedom on Teams, then automatically you also give more freedom on the Dataverse for Teams part.
Yep, indeed. And that's what you see happening, because people now some apps that are created on the freedom part are that successful that they grow into the more governed part, and that is where the governance comes in. Because what you don't want is that an app is used by, let's say, a couple of hundred of people, but the actual flows behind it are running under a user identity, those kind of things. So that's where the management unmanaged part comes in. And that's where you have some monitoring or governance reporting equal to what we have for the Teams governance reporting.
Yeah, and I know that in Dataverse for Teams, you can also share applications and data between teams, right? So how do you know from an organization perspective, which of these applications that might started on the left-hand side, right, in the creativity and freedom part, and start to be successful, right? How can you find it out?
Yeah, well, it's similar to actually the Teams governance bit. Microsoft has been so friendly to create the Center of Excellence Starter Kit, where you can have some default reporting on how apps are behaving and what apps are doing, and some admin tasks that you can do there. But one of the things you can also either do or build is have an overview of which apps are used often or which apps are used not at all. So you can delete them, but also which apps are successful. So you might ask the owner, I see that this app is heavily used. What is it?
Or perhaps,
why do you use it? Is it useful for other departments?
And then perhaps help them to improve the quality where appropriate or where needed, right? And then is this for all apps, or is it specific for the Power Platform?
The Center of Excellence Starter Kit is meant for the Power Platform.
Okay, just to make sure that that's clear. Right?
What I have to say, there's a Center of Excellence on the left side, and that's the organizational part of things. It doesn't stop with just having a toolkit and running some report. There must be some Center of Excellence to make sure that the Power Platform itself can grow within the company.
Right,
because having 2 or 3 or 4 different platforms to build your own citizen development stuff doesn't really make sense.
So there needs to be a group of people with the appropriate business roles, right? And they need to be part of the hierarchy or part of the plan, right? They need to have their role and responsibility and freedom. And then there's this software toolkit that helps them implement and measure that and do their work better, right?
Yeah, and they can also decide if things really become successful, that there really needs some extra DevOps automation behind it to make sure that we really have a DTAP environment where we can start building apps in development and then moving it with pipelines to the actual production environment.
So then the Power Platform is a true development platform, right? Yeah. It's a different language, just right. It's not C#, but it's just the Power.
And that's not really where it starts, of course, but that's where it could end if you reach a certain maturity stage.
And how do you use this with your customers, right? Can a customer just implement this, right? How do you help?
Well, the Starter Kit gives us the basics. They're not for the organizational part, but really for the governance part. We help with setting up the Center of Excellence. So what are our best practices? We can help them with growing the Center of Excellence by providing consultants with knowledge of how to build apps and those kind of things. The Starter Kit it's a starter kit, so you have to build some extra stuff to make sure that it is a fit for the customer, and that's where we help as well.
Okay. Yeah. Clear.
Okay. I mentioned DLP. For Teams. Well, there's also a DLP for the Power Platform. although in my opinion it's not really DLP, it kind of differs. What it is important though, because the DLP policies within the Power Platform make sure that you can't, for example, send all the CEO information to Twitter automatically. So
let's not do that.
No, indeed. So it really excludes connectors from working or excludes combinations of connectors from working together. So having a connector to an internal application and combining it with a connector to Twitter, for example, well, those kind of things we can enforce that they can't work.
So from a business perspective, this allows me to give people the freedom to do the left part without risking the important stuff for the business, for the company.
Absolutely. And you can do that different per environment. So for marketing, for example, there are different rules probably than for an environment that is created for, well, your citizen development stuff.
Yeah.
So
and then Dataverse for Teams has their own environment, so you can have your separate policies for that, right? And then you can probably get those policies copied over or stamped on those Teams environments.
Yep. And the environments for Dataverse for Teams are named, have a specific naming, so you can find them and of course have governance reporting on that as well.
Okay. So, yeah, great.
Yeah. All right. Then the last one is the third-party Teams apps. Those are, of course, there are some considerations what you can do. There's the whole list about, well, and that's a lot.
So that's the list of applications that are available, let's say, in the Microsoft Teams App Store.
That's really what it is. But it's important to consider that some of those apps have data that they use. And that data is typically not stored in your own tenant and therefore somewhere outside your tenant. Doesn't have to be harmful at all, but it depends on the policies of your company if you want to use those. And it's important to at least make that consideration if you want to allow that or not.
And so are all apps made equal? I know that before we put an application in the store, that we review it, that it's a proper app, that it's not a scam, right? That it's truly doing something sensible work, right?
Yep.
But is there more differentiation that you can do from a governance perspective?
Yeah, from a governance perspective, there is Microsoft introduced, you see it in the image, the certification, and that is where you. It's not that apps without the certification are harmful or dangerous or anything, but at least it gives some insight in if the creator of the app is actually who he says he is, or even further, if you see that there's the publisher attestation.
So that you know who published the application and it's an actual trustworthy source.
Yeah, that's the second one. And there's of course the Microsoft 365 certification, and then it goes to the full-blown Microsoft certification bit, meaning that the app is actually.
And then there's multiple apps. There's quite often a few apps that do more or less the same thing.
Yeah, you notice that on the slide as well. There are Polly is of course the most is the most known app for doing polls. But if you have a look at the App Store in there are at least 5, 6, 7, maybe 8 other poll, agile poll, whatever. There are a lot of apps doing similar things, and it's not that the one is better than the other. It's more that it might make sense to pick one to use within the company instead of using all.
Get fewer calls on how does this work. Right? Makes it more simpler to use for your end user.
Absolutely. Same with whiteboard related. I mean, of course, there's the whiteboard of Microsoft, but there's also Mural and there's Miro, and there are a lot of others. It might make sense to just pick one and use that for the whole company.
Or for a department, right?
Yeah. So you can use permission policies to make sure that that is all in place. Who can select which apps? Who can test apps? If new apps are requested, and those kind of things.
Yeah, and then so that's the backend tooling to implement the policies, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's on the third-party Teams apps. Yeah. So my last slide. A few takeaways, I would say. The first one is more prediction. That Teams will become the center of your daily work if you use Microsoft 365. Microsoft is heading there. I'm convinced that it is the right way to go for your daily work. I have a typo in there. Governance and adoption go hand in hand, but they go hand in hand, so to speak.
Well, but perhaps it's also a very cognitive thing.
Maybe it is, but indeed, they go hand in hand. Hope that is clear now. And governance is not only about the individual service, but there is some platform-related governance stuff that you have to do prior to implementing the services. And the fourth one, it is an evolving platform, so make sure that it's not a one-time thing that you do governance. It grows.
Yeah, you do the work, then you implement it, and then you need to maintain it as things evolve, as things change, as probably your business requirements will change.
Yeah. Well, next step is would be create that governance plan, create an adoption plan, and communicate about it, and act on it. And if you need help from us, of course, just call us.
Yeah. Okay. Clear.
Well, excellent. So thank you guys so much for this great session. As for our next steps, we suggest that you reach out to Macaw if you have any questions for this, or reach out to your Microsoft representative if you have that. They're completely aware of this session and of this webinar series, so they are able to help out. Another thing you can do is consider a Discover workshop. With a Discover workshop, you will have real-life experience on how Teams is working, or what governance means for you. Or you can have a solution app workshop, but also can be hosted by Macaw. So they're absolutely capable of doing this and help you start off with a proof of concept. If you want to learn more, you can go to our M365 blog, our Microsoft 365 blog. That's aka.ms M365 blog. Or look for the roadmap information. I had some questions here where I was working on the roadmap information. There's some things we can share, some things we cannot share, but what we can publicly share is on this M365 roadmap. And if you're missing on any features, please go to aka.ms/uservoice and make sure that you let us know what you're missing and what we can do better within Microsoft Teams. And you can vote on these, or let people vote on that matter. And what gets the most votes, we will start building that. If you want to see this session and also the other sessions, you can find them tomorrow on aka.ms/TAP sessions. It means Teams as a platform sessions. Or if you want a few other webinars, please go to aka.ms/TAP webinars_en for the English version as you're watching right now. And last but not least, if you want to join our Microsoft Teams talk community, it's a community that was started by Michel Baumann and myself, where we have more than 500 users at the moment, who you can discuss your problems with, problems about Teams, right? Not all of your problems, of course. That would be strange. I was thinking about it, but, right? Yeah, it's really challenging. Yeah, and basically, just join us. You will get, there's a form you can fill in, and we will let you into that team environment. It's a Teams environment. And with that, we're at the end of this webinar. I would like to thank you so much for watching. Hope you've enjoyed it. Hope you learned stuff from it. If you have any questions, please reach out to us. And I hope to see you in another session. Still 10 sessions to go. So if you want to learn more about Teams as a platform, this is something to look out for. Thank you so much, and speak to you guys soon.